When you buy a house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, you imagine a life of peace and calm. Sunday morning coffee on the porch, the hum of lawn mowers, maybe the sound of a distant barbecue sizzling on a summer afternoon. That's the dream, right? Well, my little slice of the American dream came with a side of HOA madness. Enter Kerren, the self-appointed neighborhood queen and enforcer of all things trivial. You know the type. She's the kind of person who will stand at your property line with a tape measure, making sure your grass is no more than precisely 2.5 inches tall. Now, I like to keep my yard neat. I really do, but I also like a little personality. So I had set up a nice little garden in my front yard. Not too much, just some bright flowers, a small water fountain for the birds, and a couple of quirky garden gnomes because why not? It's my yard, my little slice of freedom, or so I thought. But then Kerren happened. She had her eye on my yard from the moment I moved in. It started small, passive-aggressive notes about community standards and property value slipped under my door. I ignored them at first, figuring she'd lose interest. But no, she only doubled down. Then came the fines. It seems my harmless little bird fountain was somehow an unauthorized water feature. I got a notice from the HOA demanding I remove it immediately. They claimed it violated some obscure line in the 50-page HOA manual that no one in their right mind would actually read. And of course, Kerren was the one who brought it to their attention. I removed the fountain, grumbling the entire time, but that wasn't enough for her. Oh no, she needed a bigger win, something that would make it clear that she, and only she, ruled this street. That's when the water issue started. I woke up one hot July morning to find my sprinklers spitting out nothing but dry, dusty air. My lush green grass was already wilting in the summer heat. The bright marigolds looked like they were begging for mercy, and the birds that once fluttered around my yard were now looking at me like I had personally betrayed them. I checked the hose, dry, the spigot, dry. I even checked my water bill, paid in full. Confused and slightly panicked, I called the water company. After a brief hold filled with tinny elevator music, the representative confirmed what I feared. My water had been cut off, not due to non-payment, but because the HOA had reported a water misuse violation against me. Apparently, someone had filed a complaint that I was wasting water, and without a second thought, the HOA had pulled the plug on my entire outdoor supply. I knew exactly who that someone was, our neighborhood watchdog, Kerren. She had finally escalated from notes and fines to full-on sabotage. This was war. I stormed over to her house, but she conveniently didn't answer the door, though I could see her blinds twitching as I stood on her porch, fists clenched, probably looking like a madman. I even considered ripping up my HOA agreement right there and throwing it on her perfectly manicured lawn, but that would just end up with another fine. Now, if I was going to fight back, I needed to play this smart. I retreated, but not in defeat, in preparation. If Kerren wanted to cut off my water, fine. I'd make sure my yard looked amazing without a single drop-off or yet. If she thought she could kill my garden, she was in for a surprise. She had no idea who she was messing with. I spent the next week doing research. If Kerren wanted to play dirty, I would play smart. I dove deep into the world of xeriscaping, a fancy word for landscaping that doesn't need much water. It's the kind of gardening you see in the deserts of Arizona or the rocky hills of Nevada, where plants don't just survive the heat, they thrive in it. I figured if my HOA water had become a casualty in this war, I might as well embrace the drought. I ripped out every single blade of my dying, yellowing grass, the kind of grass that HOAs dream about, the kind that's green, lush, and boring as a DMV line. I tore up my flower beds, yanked out the thirsty marigolds, and pulled down the bird fountain Kerren hated so much. I cleared the entire yard, leaving just dry, cracked soil. For a brief moment, I wondered if I had finally lost it, if Kerren had actually driven me to the brink of sanity. But as the old saying goes, you've got to hit rock bottom before you can rise again. So that's exactly what I did. I hit the rock, lit literally. I ordered 5 tons of crushed gravel in various shades of warm desert colors, rust reds, sun-baked yellows, and deep, cool grays. When the dump truck arrived, the driver gave me a look that said, "You sure about this, buddy?" I just grinned and nodded as the mountain of rock tumbled onto my driveway. I could already imagine Kerren peeking through her blinds, eyes wide with confusion. She probably thought I'd finally given up. But this wasn't surrender. This was the first move in a long game. I spent the next few days turning my front yard into a desert scene straight out of an old cowboy movie. I arranged boulders and gravel into carefully planned dry riverbeds and swirling, wind-blown patterns. I planted agave, yucca, and prickly pear cacti, plants that thrive on neglect, that laugh in the face of drought, that can go for months without a single drop of water. I added clusters of vibrant, heat-loving succulents, jade plants, aloes, and ghostly blue echeveria, their thick, fleshy leaves soaking up the sun like solar panels. The final touch was a towering saguaro cactus. I found it a specialty nursery. It cost more than my last phone bill, but when I planted it right in the middle of my yard, its tall, regal shape casting a long shadow over the gravel, I knew it was worth every penny. It looked like it had been standing there for centuries, watching over my house like a silent, spiky guardian. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more trick up my sleeve. I installed solar-powered, motion-activated lights around the base of my cactus, the kind that flicker like open flames at night. It gave the whole yard an eerie, otherworldly glow once the sun went down, like something out of an old ghost story, the kind of place you'd expect to see a shadowy figure slowly crossing under the moonlight. I even added a few hidden speakers that played the soft, mournful sound of desert winds rustling through the rocks. You could hear it if you stood on the edge of my property, the faint, haunting whistle carrying through the quiet suburban night. It was subtle but creepy enough to give anyone the chills. By the time I finished, my yard looked like something out of a desert survival show, wild, untamed, and a little bit dangerous. I even hung a sign on my front door that read, "Welcome to the wasteland." It was a final sarcastic jab at Kerren and her obsession with control. I took a step back, wiped the sweat from my brow, and admired my work. It was beautiful in a harsh, defiant kind of way. The perfect middle finger to Kerren's cookie cutter, perfectly pruned garden next door. It didn't need a drop of water, and it sure as hell didn't need her approval. I could almost hear the distant hiss of a rattlesnake and the howl of a lone coyote, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had the upper hand. Kerren had tried to choke the life out of my yard, and I had turned it into a desert fortress. Now it was her move. About a week after my desert transformation, the neighborhood started buzzing. You know the kind of buzz I mean. The whispered conversations over fences, the sideways glances during morning jogs, and the barely concealed stares from passing cars. I'd catch my neighbors slowing down as they drove by, their necks craning to get a better look at my newfound wasteland. Some of them even stopped to chat. "Bold choice," one of my braver neighbors commented, nervously adjusting his baseball cap as he leaned on his car door. "You, really went all in on the whole no water thing, huh?" I just smiled, dusting my hand off like an old cowboy after a gunfight. "Yep. Figured if they're gonna cut me off, I might as well make it count." He gave me a hesitant thumbs up before quickly walking away, probably to warn the rest of the street that I had finally lost it. But not everyone was confused. A few of my more rebellious neighbors gave me approving nods, like I had just scored a point against the HOA empire. One elderly woman from 3 houses down even gave me a firm, approving clap on the shoulder as she walked by with her little yapping terrier. "About time someone stood up to that witch," she muttered with a wink, her dog yipping in agreement. But I knew the real test was still to come. Kerren. She had been unusually quiet since my yard's dramatic makeover, which was more unsettling than her usual passive-aggressive notes. I figured she was either planning her next move or trying to decide if I had finally lost my mind. Turns out it was the former. I found out a few days later when I got another official-looking letter in my mailbox, crisp white envelope, perfectly typed, with the HOA logo stamped at the top. I opened it right there on my gravel driveway, the desert sun baking my neck. "Notice of violation," it read, the words practically vibrating with Kerren's outrage. "Your front yard landscaping is not in compliance with community standards. Please restore your lawn to its previous condition or face additional fines." I laughed out loud, the sound echoing off my sun-bleached boulders. Restore it to its previous condition? Was she actually serious? My lawn was dead, scorched by the sun and choked by the very restrictions she had put in place. There was no going back now, not that I wanted to. I crumpled the letter into a tight ball and tossed it into the nearest cactus. Let her come after me. I was done playing by her ridiculous, petty rules. The next day, I decided to kick things up a notch. If she wanted to make my life difficult, I'd give her a front row seat to my rebellion. I installed a towering metal sculpture of a howling coyote in the center of my yard, a piece I found at a roadside art shop a few towns over. It had sharp, jagged edges and rusty red paint that made it look like it had been clawing its way through the desert for years. I placed it right where my old bird fountain used to stand, a final middle finger to Kerren's ridiculous water restrictions. Then, for good measure, I added a few sun-bleached cow skulls I found at a local antique shop, arranging them around the base of the sculpture like some kind of ancient, bone-strewn shrine. I even scattered a few rattlesnake warning signs for extra flair, though the only thing actually dangerous in my yard was my growing irritation with Kerren. As the sun set that evening, casting long, twisted shadows over my rocky front yard, I leaned back against my porch railing, cracked open a cold beer, and watched as Kerren's car slowly crept by. Her eyes were wide, her jaw clenched so tight I could practically hear her teeth grinding from 50 feet away. She didn't stop, didn't wave, just kept driving, her perfectly manicured nails gripping the steering wheel like she was trying to strangle it. I took a long, slow sip of my beer and gave her a casual two-finger salute as she sped up, her tires crunching over the gravel like a rattlesnake's warning rattle. She had cut off my water, tried to strangle my yard, and now, with every passing day, my little desert rebellion was growing stronger, tougher, and a whole lot thornier. Kerren had picked this fight, but I was the one turning my yard into a fortress, a dry, prickly middle finger to her HOA empire. And I was just getting started. The real showdown came about a week later. I was out front, tightening the bolts on my coyote sculpture, when I heard the unmistakable click-clack of sensible heels on my gravel driveway. I straightened up, brushing the dust off my hands, and turned to find Kerren herself, arms crossed, lips pursed so tight they practically disappeared into her face. She was flanked by two other HOA board members, both looking deeply uncomfortable, like they'd rather be anywhere else but here. I could feel the heat radiating off her, or maybe that was just the scorching afternoon sun reflecting off the desert rocks. She cleared her throat, a sharp, impatient sound that cut through the dry air. "We need to talk," she said, her voice a forced, brittle calm that barely hid the rage simmering beneath. I took a long, exaggerated look around my yard, at the towering cactus, the sun-bleached skulls, and the twisted metal coyote frozen mid-howl. "About what?" I asked innocently, leaning casually against one of my larger boulders. "The grass you made me tear up, the fountain you made me take down, or the water you cut off without notice?" Her eyes narrowed, a tiny muscle in her jaw twitching. "Your yard," she said, stabbing a perfectly manicured finger in the direction of my gravel and cacti, "is a violation of HOA guidelines. It's, she stuttered, searching for the right word. "An eyesore." I raised an eyebrow, trying to suppress a grin. "An eyesore? You mean to tell me that a perfectly curated, low-water, eco-friendly yard is an eyesore, but your artificial, chemical-soaked lawn is a thing of beauty?" I could see the two other board members shifting uncomfortably behind her, their eyes darting from my yard to hers and back again. One of them even had the decency to blush a little. "It's not in keeping with the aesthetic of the neighborhood," she snapped, her voice climbing an octave. "You've turned your yard into some kind of desert nightmare." I chuckled, crossing my arms. "You mean a desert oasis? One that doesn't use a single drop of the precious water you cut off? One that requires zero maintenance and costs me nothing in landscaping fees?" I could almost see the gears grinding in her head, the bright red flush creeping up her neck. She opened her mouth to fire back, but one of the other board members A balding man with a nervous tick in his left eye quickly stepped forward, putting a hand on her arm. "Actually," he said, clearing his throat awkwardly, "we've been getting some positive feedback from the other neighbors. Some of them are even asking about how they can reduce their water usage too." Kerren whipped her head around to glare at him, her eyes narrowing like a hawk spotting a field mouse. "What?" she hissed, her fingers curling into tight fists. I took a slow, satisfied breath, letting the moment stretch out. "You see, Kerren," I said, my voice dripping with faux sympathy, "I'm just ahead of the curve. Water conservation is the future. Maybe if you spent a little less time obsessing over grass length and more time thinking about sustainability, you'd understand." She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her face turned a blotchy shade of purple, her carefully styled hair practically vibrating with indignation. I half expected steam to start shooting out of her ears. The other board members, sensing a losing battle, quickly muttered something about needing to review this HOA guidelines and shuffled away, their shoes crunching over my gravel driveway like a hasty retreat. Kerren stood there for a moment, her mouth still working like a fish out of water, before spinning on her heel and storming back to her house, her heels sinking into the gravel with every angry step. I watched her go, leaning back against my boulder, the sun casting long, jagged shadows across my yard. It was a small victory, but a satisfying one. She had tried to break me, to crush my little patch of freedom beneath her perfectly polished heel, and I had responded by turning my yard into a defiant, sun-baked oasis. As I turned to head back inside, I caught a glimpse of my coyote sculpture, its metal mouth stretched open in a silent, eternal howl. It almost felt like it was laughing with me, a twisted, rusted symbol of survival in the harshest conditions. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at home in my desert fortress.